I'm thrilled to be joined today by a trio of panelists with a diverse set of experiences. We have Gretchen Myers from Chevron and Martin Glowick and Tom Duffy from Accenture. So Gretchen was the chief cloud security architect for their successful large-scale migration to Azure and is one of the lead architects today driving IoT innovations at the supermajor. Martin is a managing director that supported Gretchen through the secure cloud deployment journey and really the enablement for their secure IoT journey. Martin also focuses on artificial intelligence and machine learning for Accenture Security. Finally, Tom Duffy is a security principal who spent many years in heavy regulated industries like defense and utilities, also healthcare, and brings a strong viewpoint on overcoming some of those compliance and regulatory tension in terms of emerging tech. So thank you all for joining me. We got a lot to cover today, so let's jump right in. One of the things that we're seeing in pretty much every industry is an explosion of IoT, and really it's based on trapped value, on value that we see in this distributed, sensor-based computing model. There are opportunities to drive new streams of revenue, but before you're able to do that, there are some common constructs like cloud, like security, that we really need to unpack and get right. So Gretchen, if I can turn it over to you to give us a quick background on Chevron's cloud deployment that really paved the way to enabling IoT.
Excellent. I'm really excited to be here to talk about this journey because we've had so many lessons learned on the way. In the early days for Chevron, around 2016, 2017, when we really started focusing on the cloud journey, there were a lot of questions around how do we track business value associated with this migration. And at that point, we were focused on our traditional IT application portfolio. So we went through an effort to look at different value cases, one focusing on what happens if we re-platform the portfolio and really just change the underlying infrastructure across the board. That particular value case showed enormous value, like triple-digit value in terms of percentages, but the ramp period, because of the intense upfront work on re-platforming, took some time. Now, we also did a simultaneous value case focusing more on the actual lift and shift approach. What happens if we just forklift our data center environments into Azure? And that had an immediate value, but the long-term play was a much lower level overall. And so the learnings from that really drove us towards a hybrid approach. Where there was significant value to be gained, we re-platformed upfront. But we also recognized that there was quite a bit, especially when it came to focusing on cleaning out some of our legacy end-of-lease data centers, that lift and shift would help us get that faster. And those lessons learned from how to drive the consumption and the value case also taught us embracing agile methodologies, looking at building cross-functional teams, and by cross-functional, not just software engineers from different domains, but bringing our engineering and our customers into these conversations really enabled us to unlock the value of that traditional application portfolio. My role at the time was focusing on how to make sure security wasn't a blocker to unlocking this value. And we really rethought how does security by design change as we migrate to cloud. So we focused on multiple areas, including security monitoring. How do we provide visibility to our SOC teams? How do we focus on identity and access management, which will now have a much more important role in our overall security posture? The ways that we look at technical controls, and also the ways that we ultimately deliver security in conjunction with our operations partners. Through that journey of understanding those components, Accenture was a key partner. One of the key things they brought to the table in the conversation was the idea of how do we apply technical controls to Azure services. As we learned to commercialize or Chevron certify an Azure service, Accenture was there helping us define the technical controls and then actually determine how we can enforce those controls in the Azure environment. With those partnerships and with that approach, we were able to work very closely to realize the value from those business cases with secure posture.
Yeah, Gretchen, I love that. I love that Chevron did the due diligence up front to understand what the value paths were, and they didn't take a singular approach. There was value in both directions, some short, some medium term, and they were able to, I think, capture and maximize that value by taking that bimodal approach. One thing you did mention around security controls, Martin, I want to kick over to you. You spent a ton of time with Gretchen as a partner on that journey. What are one or two of the juicy or noteworthy elements that come to mind when you think of the success that you two pioneered in Azure at Chevron?
Sure. So one of the items with any transition, there's a lot of lessons to be learned, and with cloud adoption, privacy and security were paramount, right? It came right up to the front. So it's not without its bumps in the road, but even in the early days when we were looking at cloud access security brokers and seeing what kind of services, what kind of cloud services are being consumed by the enterprise, and what kind of risk is being posed as one aspect of the cloud transformation. But getting to the point Gretchen was making, being able to certify certain services to enable the business was very key. And we were able to do that through Azure Policy by embedding security by design into everything that we did. So as services came up, right, we were able to certify them and turn them over in an agile format very quickly. So being embedded within the agile format was paramount for us.
Yeah, I love the speed, the concept of speed in here. It seems like security, when you talk about adjectives that describe it, flexible, frictionless, fast, aren't usually the ones that come to mind. From what you guys did there, it sounds like you started to run counter to some of the traditional security mindset. And I do remember some early days when we were trying to implement some of the DoD STIGs, and it wasn't a flawless process. We hit some bumps and we had to recover and right the path, and I think y'all did a great job of that. So Tom, speaking of STIGs, you've spent a bunch of time in defense specifically, also health, also utilities. So from a regulatory perspective, what are the elements to make sure to focus on, whether it is energy or whether it's utilities or whether it's healthcare?
Well, Dan, both utilities and healthcare are governed by their own sets of enforceable criteria. On the utilities side, we have a robust suite of standards called NERC-CIP, for Critical Infrastructure Protection, that encompass both IT and OT, IoT components, with strict penalties for noncompliance. CIP 11 is a standard for information protection, which does not currently include cloud solutions. On the healthcare side, there's a different story. Healthcare falls under the purview of HIPAA, and specifically the security rule focuses on protecting electronic PHI, but it uses much higher level controls than utilities, which do allow for cloud. Controls there focus on access control, auditing, integrity, identity and access management, and data in transit. As Martin mentioned, in the CASB health check, that's where we tend to discover large amounts of shadow IT. Both utilities and healthcare may be pushing the envelope here because they may be using unsanctioned solutions. And for utilities, it's really more of a matter of when than if cloud will be embraced. For healthcare, it's already embraced, but the key there is to make sure you're going through the proper approved channels with the solution you have. And it's important to understand that regulatory compliance provides a starting point, but the strong foundation is really built on implementing robust security.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, this is the age-old, for the security practitioners out there, the age-old tension between security and compliance, and the understanding that you may be compliant, but you still may not be secure. So Martin, if I turn to you, I think folks really have an interest in understanding, what are the right fundamentals to drive a secure cloud foundation from the start, the secure by design stuff that you mentioned previously. Can you double click on how that materialized for you guys in your work in practical terms? Maybe an instance, share an instance with the audience, right, that gives them an idea of some of the lessons that you guys took away.
Yeah, so one of the main lessons I think for me that was very important throughout the engagement was especially having a security upfront and within the agile planning process. So having security at each of these steps allowed us to, as you mentioned earlier, learn fast. But one of the examples, and I'll double click down, and how we were able to kind of unpack was going off of the momentum of secure by design, meaning security in each phase. We were able to collect our requirements, right, for the risk appetite that we wanted to put in place. So along the lines, there was an IIoT, Industrial Internet of Things, device management idea. And being agile allows us to prove out technology very quickly. So in a short period of time, we're able to go in there and to evaluate the technology, whether or not it meets the criteria. And being agile, we were able to produce a minimal viable product, right, that was able to prove out the functionality and then help, then in turn, right, that goes right back into feeding the strategy and how to make that available for the enterprise. So that was one aspect of, as an example that really jumps out to mind in terms of the impact of agile and having security throughout the process.
That's perfect. One thing that this makes me think about is the POC, so the proof of concept or the proof of value paralysis that a lot of organizations get into. So Gretchen, if you want to touch on that, I'd love to hear that. But the practical and technical examples from Martin, as well as the parallels that Tom draws to some of the other industries. Do you have reflections on that? Does it resonate to you in oil and gas in the context of the evolution from cloud to IoT?
I think that's where the journey has gotten the most interesting. So it absolutely resonates, because really taking the time to understand what security meant by design meant for the IT portfolio helped us reshape the conversation when we started addressing OT, IIoT, and various edge reference architectures. So having sensors in field environments and having IT equipment out there is nothing new to the industry. But the idea that we would actually have remote users connecting through the cloud is one that created a lot of concern. And so our first challenge was more cultural than technical. We knew we could solve the problems technically and securely in ways that would meet not just regulatory requirements, which we don't worry about in the upstream side, but would also address the significant risks. We had to work through the conversation to change the dialogue. So instead of thinking of cyber as something separate and a spooky risk, we really worked to redefine digital risk and demonstrate to our engineering leadership that now cyber threats can lead to risk outcomes that they're used to dealing with every day. So a safety risk where a worker is injured, or an operations risk where a cyber threat actually shuts down operations. And once we changed that perspective, suddenly we had a very different dialogue around industrial Internet of Things and security by design, because we were talking in their language of risk profiles they were very, very familiar with. That was a key pivot in the IT and IIoT journey for Chevron. I did want to also talk about the CASB and shadow IT piece, because within Chevron, one of the rules of thumb I started to live by is what might be central IT's shadow IT is actually engineering's innovation on the edge. And so navigating that conversation took a lot of work to gain credibility by not putting down the innovation concepts, but helping the engineers understand that spot solution would not scale across the enterprise, and we wouldn't get the significant value that we're deriving from cloud and IT in the OT side without scale.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the relentless focus on value, some of the enablement capabilities that you talked about from a cloud standpoint and from a security standpoint. Martin, if I transition over to you and talk about how the secure cloud enablement accelerated, a specific example in the IoT space, would you mind sharing one of the ones that we've been a part of?
Absolutely. Well, one of my favorite examples is around crane safety. So as we know at Chevron, first and foremost, safety is paramount in anything that we do. So it was a unique scenario where we were looking to solve a safety issue with a digital solution. So how could we leverage digital, right, to help prevent, when a resource were to walk under a crane or put him or herself into a compromising situation or a dangerous place. We wanted to be able to alert them, right, to, again, keep safety at the top. So what the team was able to do was very quickly, in a couple of weeks, work with the folks in the crane safety team, put together a set of requirements and design a very quick proof of concept, proof of value, as you mentioned earlier. But in a matter of just a short amount of weeks, proved out the value. And then over the next planning session, right, has since enabled a facility down in Louisiana with the same capability. So again, using the technology as that bridge or as that enabler to a better place for resources to do their jobs in a safe manner is, again, what was my favorite part of the exercise. And it actually won a few awards internally within Chevron in terms of the value that it brought. So it was a very interesting and collaborative engagement. That was one of my favorites.
Yeah, I love that example because it really does demonstrate the art of the possible. And there's thinking, and people think they're thinking outside of the box, but until they have capabilities that really redefine or have the potential to redefine how they work and how they do things, I think you're even somewhat limited in terms of of how far they extend their thinking and their innovation. So I think one of the other things that really enables that innovation is investment. And so, Gretchen, I'd love to just get your readout on how did you formulate, the noteworthy business outcomes or the value. You've talked about value quite a bit. How did you articulate that to the board, to executive leadership? What was the process for actually doing that? Were there governance structures? Were there specific, call them tactics that you took in terms of communicating?
It's an interesting challenge because, in some ways, our executives are already bought into the idea of digital and IT/OT convergence. What we had to really think through as we started building value cases that to lead to business cases was how do we explain where the investment needs to be made? Because often we fall prey to what I call random acts of digital or the shiny object syndrome, where you have a vendor with a very pretty interface for the user, but it's baling wire and duct tape behind it, and then IT is asked to scale that beyond this initial view. And what we did as part of our IIoT strategy journey was we stepped back, took a look at what are all the business capabilities that we can start driving a new type of automation around surveillance, around production optimization, and trying to say, do we have concrete dollar value for any of these technical solutions? And this is another area where Accenture brought that data to the table and said, here's concrete value that we've seen across the industry. We took those use cases, applied it to Chevron's landscape, and we were able to put together a value case that showed the size of the prize was, close to $1 billion of annual value capture, and really helped us drive a different conversation around what the investment profile needed to look like.
Yeah, I think back to some of the joint design sessions where you had the cross-functional team, and it was amazing to see the perspectives and the diversity of thought in that group. And it was a 2-day workshop, I think, where a lot of the content for some of the value case elements were generated, and it was a really amazing assembly of people and thought. So thanks very much for that, Gretchen. I think that's super insightful and something that a lot of organizations really struggle with in terms of defining and communicating the value. So panelists, I'm going to do a machine gun style rapid response session to get your quick opinions on what are the things that folks should really stop, continue, and start either doing or thinking as you reflect on what the audience would need to hear in order to be successful? So Gretchen, I'll start with you. What are your top stop, continue, and start recommendations?
So I will say stop using IT compliance as a barrier or a blocker to innovation. If I had $1 for every time somebody said, our risk management people won't let us do this, I would be very wealthy at this point. So let's not create blockers where they don't need to be. Integrate the conversation around risk. Continue learning, tinkering, and exploring with the new technologies. We're uncovering new data models, new ways to use IIoT and Chevron every day. And it's because we've got a group of engineers and software engineers working together to put the Lego blocks together in new and unique ways. And start building cross-functional teams. Get your key business SMEs, your doctors, your nurses in healthcare, your engineers and operators in oil and gas, pull them into the room with IT and have them work together to define the prototypes of what good looks like. And you'll be amazed at how quickly you can get to new solutions.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks, Gretchen. Great insights. All right. Tom Duffy, Dr. Duffy, what are your top stop, continue, and starts?
Stop focusing on meeting minimum regulatory compliance requirements and checking the proverbial box. Continue leveraging innovative ways to increase security, protecting critical infrastructure and patient safety, and start ensuring that cloud-based solutions that are in use have been properly sanctioned by both your organization and regulatory bodies.
Perfect. I like it. Martin, what are your last? So some of the good ones were already taken. So a bit of a challenge for you. What are your stop, continue, and starts?
Sure. So I would suggest to stop limiting yourselves. What I mean by that is technology is one part of the equation. So Gretchen hit upon it with the various SMEs and whatnot, but there's also process and technology. So there's other ways to still add value. So stop limiting yourselves and just looking at one aspect. I would also continue the collaboration amongst teams. So breaking down those silos and getting other perspectives is critical in the process. And start by embracing the change, right? Embrace as technology comes and keeps up. Use security and the goals of the business to help anchor and tailor it for your needs.
That's awesome. Well done. So I think this was a wonderful session to give folks really a top to bottom view of a real client journey through cloud to IoT that resulted in innovation opportunities and unlocking real measurable business value. I heard some recurring themes throughout. I'm sure you did as well. Some of the final thoughts even included things around risk and threat governance, cross-functional teams and stakeholder buy-in. The collaboration element, the collaboration culture that's so important for these things to be successful. And then, automation. Martin talked about it in some of the key success criteria around security. So really my hope is that the audience will walk away seeing how cloud, edge, sensor all come together with security woven throughout to really drive meaningful value in the IT space. So I want to one more time say thank you to the panelists. I really appreciate your insights in big picture business value terms, but also for making things actionable. For those that are listening and are in the middle of navigating their own business, IT, security, and regulatory racetrack, the analogy of having security represent the brakes on a race car. Allowing you to go farther and faster into a turn, knowing that you've got those big brakes to back you up. So that is cybersecurity on your side, leveraged through cloud and IoT to really enable the business and drive to that business value. So thank you all for your time. Really appreciate it.